You don't survive in this world by caring. You survive by turning a blind eye. Sadie knew the rules. Scrub the floors, ignore the bloodstains on the Persian rugs, and never ever look the boss in the eye. But tonight, the rules shattered. One phone call, one desperate stifled sob echoing in a quiet hallway. That was all it took for a ruthless man to stop dead in his tracks. He wasn't supposed to hear her. He definitely wasn't supposed to care. Industrial bleach ruins the skin. It eats away the top layer of the epidermis, leaving your knuckles cracked red and prone to bleeding if you make a tight fist. Sadie stared at her hands under the harsh, fluorescent light of the staff bathroom. They looked 10 years older than the rest of her 24-year-old body. She dried them on a cheap paper towel, wincing as the rough paper dragged across a split cuticle. It didn't matter. The money mattered. The Costello estate paid triple the going rate for domestic staff. They didn't pay for exceptional dusting or a streak-free shine on the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the grey Atlantic. They paid for ghosts. You were expected to move through the sprawling, cold stone mansion without making a sound. You didn't ask why the heavy mahogany door in the east wing had a new bullet hole in it. You didn't comment on the men in cheap leather jackets who tracked mud and worse into the foyer at 3 a.m. You cleaned. You kept your head down. You survived. Sadie was a very good ghost. For 8 months, she had existed in the periphery of Victor Costello's vision, just another blur in a grey uniform, pushing a cart of cleaning supplies. Victor was not the kind of man you wanted to be noticed by. He wasn't some polished, charming aristocrat playing at organized crime. He was a second-generation bruiser who had inherited a crumbling empire and held it together with nothing but brute force and sheer paranoia. When he walked into a room, the temperature seemed to drop. He had dark, exhausted eyes, a jawline perpetually covered in a rough shadow of stubble, and a habit of staring at people as if he was calculating how much it would cost to bury them. Sadie avoided him like the plague. She memorized his schedule. If he was in the dining room, she was in the West Wing. If he was in his study, she was cleaning the guest suites. She didn't have the luxury of getting fired, or worse, getting on his bad side. Every cent of her inflated paycheck was spoken for before it even hit her account. Her younger brother Sam was dying. It was a slow, agonizing decline, leukemia-resistant to the standard rounds of chemotherapy. The experimental treatments were not covered by whatever pathetic excuse for insurance Sadie had. Desperation makes people stupid. 6 months ago, sitting in a sterile hospital waiting room, watching her brother cough up blood, Sadie had made a phone call to a man she shouldn't have, Mick O'Shea. He ran a predatory loan operation out of a strip club on the south side. He didn't ask for collateral. He didn't run a credit check. He just handed her a duffel bag with $60,000 in cash and told her the interest rate. It was a deal with the devil, but it kept Sam breathing. But the devil always comes to collect. The interest had compounded. The payments had become impossible. For the last 3 weeks, Sadie had been starving herself, walking miles to work, to save bus fare, scraping together every loose dollar to meet O'Shea's weekly quota. She picked up her plastic bucket, the heavy smell of lemon and ammonia stinging her nose. It was 1:45 a.m. The house was mostly silent, save for the rhythmic drumming of a heavy rainstorm lashing against the reinforced glass windows. Most of the staff had gone home or retreated to their quarters. Sadie had volunteered for the late shift. It paid an extra $50. $50 was a drop in the ocean of her debt, but it was something. She wheeled her cart down the second-floor corridor, the thick carpet absorbing the sound of her cheap, rubber-soled shoes. At the end of the hall was Victor's office. A sliver of warm yellow light spilled from beneath the heavy oak door. He was still awake. Sadie stopped. Her chest tightened. The rule was simple: do not disturb the boss when the door is closed. But the brass wall sconces outside his office were thick with dust, a job she was supposed to finish tonight. She hesitated, her cracked hands gripping the handle of the cart. She could skip it. No one would notice. But fear of losing this job, the only lifeline Sam had left, forced her forward. She parked the cart a safe distance away, taking a microfiber cloth and a bottle of polish. She moved silently, stepping into the pool of light outside the office door. She reached up, wiping down the ornate brass fixtures. Inside the office, she could hear the low, rhythmic clinking of ice against crystal. Victor was drinking. Heavy footsteps paced back and forth, muffled by the thick rugs. He was on the phone, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. She couldn't make out the words, just the aggressive cadence of them. Sadie worked faster, desperate to finish and retreat to the safety of the staff quarters. Then her own pocket vibrated. It was a harsh, jarring buzz against her hip. She froze. Her burner phone, the one she only used for the hospital. And O'Shea. She pulled it out, her heart hammering against her ribs. The cracked screen illuminated the dark hallway. Unknown caller. Her stomach bottomed out. It was 2 a.m. The hospital didn't call at 2 a.m. unless someone was dead. O'Shea didn't call unless he was angry. She should have turned it off. She should have walked away. But panic overrode logic. With a trembling thumb, she hit accept and pressed the cheap plastic to her ear. "Hello," Sadie whispered, her voice barely a thread of sound. "Sadie, darling." The thick, mocking Irish lilt of Mick O'Shea poured through the receiver like toxic sludge. Sadie closed her eyes, leaning back against the cold, silk-lined wallpaper of the corridor. "Mick, I have the payment. I get paid on Friday. I swear I'll have it." She kept her voice down, a desperate, frantic whisper. "Friday is a long time from now, Sadie," Mick said. He didn't sound angry. He sounded amused. That was infinitely worse. "And honestly, the interest has been stacking up. You're short. Again." "I'm not short, I did the math." "Math is subjective, sweetheart. My accountant says you owe a balloon payment of 20 grand. Tonight." Sadie's lungs forgot how to work. 20 grand. She didn't have $20 in her checking account. That wasn't the deal. She choked out, her throat restricting. "Mick, please. I've given you everything. I just need a little more time. Time's up." There was a pause, the sound of a lighter flicking on the other end. "I'm looking at something real sad right now, Sadie. Real tragic." "What are you talking about?" "I'm standing in the parking lot of St. Jude's." The blood drained from Sadie's face. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her. "No," she breathed. "No, Mick, you stay away from him. Security here is a joke," Mick continued casually. "My boy Declan walked right up to the 3rd floor, oncology wing. He says your brother looks terrible. All those tubes. Be a real shame if someone tripped over a wire. Power goes out. Alarms don't work. Kid just goes to sleep." "Stop," Sadie gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth, physically holding in the scream that wanted to tear out of her throat. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and fast, spilling over her lashes before she could blink them away. "You have 1 hour, Sadie. Wire the 20 grand, or Declan pulls the plug on the kid. Literally." "I don't have it." "Mick, please, I'll do anything. I'll work for you. I don't want you. I want my money. 1 hour. Clock's ticking." The line went dead. The silence in the hallway was deafening. Sadie stared at the dark screen of the phone. The air was too thin. She couldn't draw it into her lungs. Her brother. Sam. Small, pale, putting up a brave front while poison pumped through his veins. He was up there asleep, completely unaware that a monster was standing outside his door. Her legs gave out. Sadie slid down the wall, her knees hitting the expensive carpet. She clamped both hands over her mouth, but it wasn't enough. A sob tore its way up her throat, violent and ragged. It punched through her tightly pressed fingers, a raw, ugly sound of total, absolute defeat. She curled into a ball on the floor, the cleaning cloth discarded beside her. The tears came in a flood, now choking her. She was hyperventilating her narrow shoulders, shaking as she fought to keep the noise down. She had failed him. Sam was going to die because she was too stupid, too poor, too weak to stop it. She cried like an animal caught in a trap, gut-wrenching, breathless, and entirely broken. A few feet away inside the office, Victor Costello sat behind a heavy mahogany desk, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He was operating on 3 hours of sleep and far too much caffeine. The Russian syndicate downtown was encroaching on his supply lines. 2 of his lieutenants were pointing fingers at each other, and Victor was fairly certain he was going to have to shoot one of them by the end of the week. He poured another 2 fingers of scotch, the amber liquid burning his throat. He hated this life. He had always hated it, but it was his cross to bear. You don't walk away from the Costello family. You leave in a box. He set the glass down, resting his elbows on the desk. He closed his eyes, welcoming the quiet. The house was finally still. Then he heard it. It was faint at first. A muffled gasp. A wet, hitching breath. Victor's eyes snapped open. The exhaustion vanished, replaced instantly by the cold, calculating alertness that had kept him alive this long. He didn't move. He listened. It was coming from the hallway, right outside his door. Victor's hand slid smoothly into the open drawer of his desk, his fingers wrapping around the cold grip of a suppressed 9mm. Intruders didn't usually cry, but in his world, a distraction was a distraction. He stood up, his tall frame moving with a terrifying lack of sound. He bypassed the center of the room, keeping to the shadows along the wall. He reached the oak door. The crying was clearer now. It wasn't a trap. It wasn't an act. It was the sound of someone whose world was actively ending. The sheer agony in that muffled sobbing made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Victor reached out, turning the brass handle slowly, making sure the latch didn't click. He pulled the door open just a few inches. The light from the hallway spilled over his boots. He looked down. There, crumpled against the wall like a discarded rag doll, was one of the maids. He vaguely recognized her. Small, quiet, always looking at the floor. She was wearing the standard grey uniform, her dark hair slipping out of a messy bun. She had her hands clamped over her mouth, tears streaming down her pale face, rocking back and forth. A cheap plastic bucket and a bottle of polish sat abandoned a few feet away. Victor frowned. The grip on his gun loosened, but he didn't lower it. He didn't do tears. He didn't do comfort. If a staff member was having a breakdown, they were supposed to do it on their own time, in their own quarters. He opened his mouth to tell her exactly that. To tell her to get up, get out, and not come back. But before he could speak, the burner phone on the floor next to her buzzed again. Sadie flinched violently, as if the device had struck her. She scrambled for it with shaking, desperate hands, dropping it once before hitting the speaker button. Mick, she choked out, her voice a wet, pathetic rasp. Victor froze. Mick O'Shea. What the hell was one of his maids doing, talking to a bottom-feeding street rat like O'Shea? Just checking in, darling. O'Shea's slimy voice echoed from the phone's tiny speaker. Declan just sent me a picture. Your brother looks so peaceful. Be a shame to wake him up. You got my money yet? I'm trying, Sadie sobbed, bending over the phone as if she could protect it. I called my bank. I tried to get a cash advance. They declined it. Mick, I need until morning. Just let me call someone. Bank's closed, Sadie. Your credit is garbage. You have 45 minutes. And honestly, don't bother calling the cops. By the time they get here, Declan will have injected a lovely little air bubble into your brother's IV. An embolism. Very tragic. Hard to prove. Sadie let out a horrific sound, a wail of pure, unadulterated grief that she immediately tried to swallow down. Victor stood in the doorway perfectly still. The pieces fell into place. A loan shark. A sick kid. Extortion. O'Shea was operating in Costello territory, extorting a civilian, extorting his employee, inside his house. A dangerous, quiet fury ignited in Victor's chest. It wasn't righteous justice. Victor wasn't a hero. He was a monster. But he was a monster with strict rules about territory and respect. O'Shea was a roach, and this roach was dirtying his house, threatening a girl who scrubbed Victor's floors for minimum wage. Victor pushed the heavy oak door wide open. The hinges didn't creak, but the shift in the air was palpable. Sadie didn't notice him at first. She was too lost in the drowning wave of her own panic. She was begging now, rapid-fire pleas falling from her lips into the cold speaker of the phone. "I'll sign whatever you want. I'll work it off. I'll do anything, Mick, please. Don't hurt him. He's just a kid. He doesn't know anything about the money." A large, heavy shadow fell over her. Sadie gasped, her head snapping up. Victor Costello stood towering over her. He had shed his suit jacket hours ago. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his tie hanging loose. He held a gun down by his thigh, casually, like an extension of his arm. But it was his face that made Sadie's blood run cold. It was carved out of granite. His dark eyes were fixed on the phone on the floor, burning with a quiet, terrifying violence. Sadie scrambled backward, her rubber shoes squeaking against the carpet. She hit the wall, her breath catching in her throat. She had broken the rule. She had disturbed him. She was going to be fired. She was going to be killed. "Mr. Costello," she stammered frantically, wiping at her wet face with her ruined hands. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was just cleaning. I'll go." Victor didn't look at her. He stepped forward, his polished leather shoe stopping inches from the phone. "Sadie." "Who's that?" Mick's voice squawked from the device. "You better not be involving anyone else, sweetheart, or I swear to God." Victor crouched down. His movements were slow, deliberate. He picked up the cheap plastic phone. It looked absurdly small in his large, calloused hand. He didn't say anything at first. He just brought the phone up to his face. "Sadie," Mick barked. "Answer me, you dumb bitch." Sadie squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her hands over her ears. "O'Shea," Victor said. His voice wasn't loud. It wasn't a shout. It was a low, resonant baritone that vibrated with lethal authority. It was the voice of a man who gave orders to kill between sips of coffee. The line went dead silent. "Who is this?" Mick asked, the bravado slipping just a fraction. "You're breathing my air, Mick," Victor said softly. He stood up, turning his gaze toward the dark window at the end of the hall. "You're operating in my city, and you're bothering my staff. In my house." A long, agonizing pause stretched over the line. Mr. Costello." Mick's voice dropped an octave. The sneering Irish lilt vanished, replaced by the unmistakable tremor of sheer terror. "Victor, I didn't know." "You have a man at St. Jude's?" Victor stated calmly, ignoring the stammering apology. "Declan." "Victor, it's just business. The girl owes me." "Listen very closely to me, Mick, because I will not repeat myself." Victor interrupted. His voice dropped to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "You are going to call Declan. You are going to tell him to walk out of that hospital, get in his car, and drive out of this state. If he is still in the city limits by sunrise, I will have him skinned." "Done." Mick practically choked on the word. "He's gone. Consider it done, Mr. Costello." "Good," Victor said. "Now, as for the debt, the girl doesn't owe you anything. The debt is cancelled. The interest is cancelled. In fact, you owe me a tax for the disrespect of making a phone call to my private residence at 2 in the morning. "Tax," Mick squeaked. 50 grand. delivered to my warehouse on the docks by noon tomorrow. If it's short, or if you're late, I'm going to send Rocco to your little club, and he's going to burn it to the ground with you inside it. Do we understand each other?" "Yes, sir. Absolutely, Mr. Costello. I swear the girl is free and clear. I won't ever contact her again. If you even look in her direction, I will pull your teeth out with a pair of pliers," Victor said smoothly. He ended the call without waiting for a reply. The silence rushed back into the hallway, thick and suffocating. Victor stood there for a moment, staring at the phone. He pressed a button, turning it off, cutting the power completely. Then he turned his head and looked at Sadie. She was still pressed against the wall, trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. Her eyes were wide, terrified, staring at him as if he were the devil himself. And maybe he was. Victor slowly engaged the safety on his gun and slipped it into the back of his waistband. He tossed the burner phone onto the cart with a clatter. "Get up," he said. It wasn't a request. Sadie scrambled to her feet, her legs weak and shaking. She gripped the edge of the cleaning cart to keep from falling over. She kept her head down, staring at the toes of his expensive leather shoes. "Look at me," Victor commanded. Sadie forced her chin up. She met his eyes. They were dark, cold, and entirely unreadable. She expected anger. She expected to be fired. "Your brother," Victor said flatly. "What's wrong with him?" "The leukemia," Sadie stammered, her voice cracking. He's at St. Jude's." Victor studied her face. He saw the dark circles under her eyes, the hollow cheekbones, the absolute exhaustion radiating off her small frame. He glanced down at her hands, red cracked, bleeding at the cuticles. He felt a strange, uncomfortable tightening in his chest. He ignored it. "Go to the kitchen," Victor ordered. "Tell the night chef to make you something to eat. You look like a stiff breeze would snap you in half." Sadie blinked, entirely thrown off balance. I have to finish the brass." "The brass is fine," Victor snapped, his patience fraying. "Go eat, then go to your room. You're off the clock." "But Mr. Costello, the money." "I handled the money," Victor said, his voice hardening. "O'Shea is done. If he or anyone else contacts you again, you tell me. Immediately. Understand?" Sadie stared at him, tears welling in her eyes all over again. The crushing, suffocating weight that had been sitting on her chest for 6 months vanished in a matter of seconds. He had saved Sam. He had saved her. "Thank you," she whispered, a sob breaking in her throat. "Thank you so much. I don't know how to repay you. I'll work double shifts. You'll do your job," Victor interrupted coldly, turning his back on her. He didn't want her gratitude. It felt wrong. It felt heavy. "Keep the floors clean. Keep your head down. And for God's sake, stop crying outside my office." He walked back into his study, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind him, leaving Sadie standing alone in the quiet hallway. She took a shaky breath, the smell of lemon and ammonia, suddenly the sweetest thing in the world. She wiped her face, staring at the closed door. Victor Costello was a monster. Everyone knew that. But as Sadie walked toward the kitchen, her heart beating a steady, safe rhythm for the first time in months, she realized something else. Sometimes you need a monster to keep the wolves at bay. The smell of St. Jude's was permanently etched into Sadie's olfactory memory. It was a sharp, clinical blend of rubbing alcohol floor wax and the metallic tang of fear. Usually walking through the sliding glass doors felt like stepping into a vacuum chamber. Today it felt like walking into a cathedral. She had taken the early bus, running on 0 sleep and a cup of stale break-room coffee. Her chest was a tight drum. Victor Costello had said O'Shea was handled. He had said the debt was gone. But people like Sadie didn't get miracles. They got eviction notices and final warnings. She bypassed the main desk, keeping her head down, her battered sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. She navigated the maze of corridors to the oncology wing, her heart hammering against her ribs. 3rd floor, room 312. She turned the corner. The door was open. Sadie stopped dead. The bed was empty, stripped to the mattress. The paper cup of coffee slipped from her cracked fingers, splashing brown liquid across the polished floor. Her vision blurred. The buzzing in her ears drowned out the intercom announcements. Declan, O'Shea's man. He had been here. He had. "Can I help you, miss?" Sadie whipped around. A nurse in blue scrubs was watching her eyebrows raised at the spilled coffee. "My brother Sadie," choked out, grabbing the doorframe to keep her knees from buckling. Samuel Hayes. He was in 312. "Where is he?" The nurse's expression softened instantly. "Oh, honey. Breathe. He's fine. He was moved this morning." Sadie blinked the fluorescent lights burning her retinas. "Moved where the ICU. No, up to the 5th floor. The private suites." The nurse pointed toward the elevators. "Room 505. Sadie didn't wait. She abandoned the mess on the floor and practically sprinted to the elevator bank. She jammed the up button until her thumb ached. When the doors finally opened on the 5th floor, the difference was jarring. The linoleum was replaced by thick carpet. The walls were painted a soft, soothing beige instead of stark white. It was terrifyingly quiet. She found 505. The door was heavy, solid wood. She pushed it open. Sam was sitting up in a massive adjustable bed. He was watching a massive, flat-screen television mounted on the wall. The room was twice the size of his old one, bathed in natural light from a window that actually overlooked the park instead of the brick wall of the parking garage. There was a fruit basket on the table. "Sadie." Sam beamed. He looked pale, his head bald from the chemo, but his smile was genuine. "Look at this. The TV has every channel. I've been watching monster trucks for an hour." Sadie couldn't speak. She walked over to the bed, her legs feeling like lead, and threw her arms around his fragile shoulders. She buried her face in his thin neck, inhaling the scent of his skin beneath the antiseptic. He was warm. He was breathing. "Whoa, squishing me," Sam laughed, patting her back clumsily. "What's wrong, you crying?" "No," Sadie lied, pulling back and wiping her face with her sleeve. "Just surprised." "Sam, how did this happen?" A woman in a crisp white coat stepped into the room holding an iPad. "Dr. Evans." Sadie's stomach clenched. She owed Dr. Evans $4,000 in back copays. "Ms. Hayes," Dr. Evans said, her tone completely devoid of its usual strained patience. She sounded deferential. "I'm glad you're here. We wanted to discuss Samuel's new treatment schedule." "New treatment?" Sadie whispered. "I can't. I haven't paid you for the last round. Your balance is 0, Ms. Hayes," Dr. Evans said, smoothly tapping the screen of her tablet. An anonymous benefactor reached out to the hospital's financial board early this morning. They covered the outstanding balance, the transfer to the private wing, and pre-funded the experimental immunotherapy trial. "We start him on the new meds tomorrow." The room spun. Sadie gripped the metal railing of the bed. "An anonymous benefactor. Keep the floors clean. Keep your head down. And for God's sake, stop crying outside my office." Victor hadn't just scared off a loan shark. He had bought her brother's life. He had thrown hundreds of thousands of dollars at a hospital he had no connection to for a maid he barely knew. It wasn't a miracle. It was a purchase. Sadie looked at Sam, who was happily watching a truck crush a sedan on the screen. He was safe. But as the sheer scale of Costello's power settled over her, a new, colder fear crept into her chest. You didn't take a gift from a monster without owing him your soul. 3 days later, the Costello estate was a powder keg. The Russian syndicate hadn't backed down. They had hit 2 of Victor's supply trucks at the docks, burning them to the axles. The tension in the house was suffocating. The guards tripled. The heavy gates remained locked. The men in cheap leather jackets were replaced by men in expensive suits with bulges under their arms, pacing the halls with restless, feral energy. Victor was a thunderstorm trapped in a tailored suit. He hadn't slept. He was snapping at his lieutenants, throwing crystal glasses at the wall, when a phone call went south, and radiating a brand of violence that made the staff physically shrink when he walked past. Sadie stayed invisible. It was her only defense mechanism. She scrubbed, she polished, she vacuumed the carpets until her back screamed in agony, but she couldn't stop looking at him. Every time she saw Victor striding down a hallway, barking orders into a phone, his dark eyes, shadowed with exhaustion, her chest did a strange, painful flutter. He was terrifying. He was a killer. But he had given Sam a private room. He had given Sam a future. It was a contradiction her brain couldn't reconcile. It was 11 p.m. when the call came for a clean-up in the formal dining room. Sadie wheeled her cart down the hall, her stomach in knots. The dining room was Victor's war room. If there was a mess, it wasn't spilled wine. She pushed the heavy double doors open. The room was empty, the long mahogany table wiped clean of maps and ledgers. But near the fireplace, the white marble floor was stained. Blood. Not a little. A dark, jagged pool of it smeared across the stone, as if something heavy had been dragged toward the side door. Sadie swallowed hard. She didn't ask questions. She put on her thick yellow rubber gloves, poured the heavy bleach solution into her bucket, and got to her knees. She scrubbed. The chemical smell burned her eyes. The blood was tacky, resisting the rough bristles of the brush. She leaned into it, her shoulders aching, her cracked knuckles protesting against the harsh friction. "You're using the wrong brush." Sadie flinched so hard she knocked the bucket. Corrosive water sloshed over the rim, splashing onto her jeans. Victor was standing in the doorway. He was completely still, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He looked wrecked. His tie was gone, his collar unbuttoned, his hair ruffled as if he had run his hands through it 100 times. He was watching her with an intensity that made the oxygen flee the room. "I'm sorry," Sadie whispered, scrambling to wipe up the spilled water with a rag. "I'll get it out, Mr. Costello. It just takes a minute." Victor walked into the room. His footsteps were silent. He stopped right beside her. "Stop," he said. Sadie froze her hands, hovering over the bloody marble. "Take the gloves off," he ordered. Sadie hesitated, her heart hammering. Slowly she peeled the thick yellow rubber off her hands. Her knuckles were raw, the skin split and angry red. The bleach water had seeped in, making them sting fiercely. Victor stared at her hands, a muscle feathered in his jaw. He set his glass down on the edge of the dining table with a sharp clink. He reached into his trouser pocket and pulled out a small, unlabeled black jar. He tossed it. It hit the marble right next to Sadie's knee. "Medical grade," Victor said flatly. "Use it, twice a day. If you get an infection, you're a liability." Sadie stared at the jar. It was heavy, expensive glass. "Mr. Costello, You don't have to." "I don't like blood on my floors, Sadie." He cut her off, his voice a low, rough growl. "Not mine, not my enemies, and definitely not yours." He didn't wait for her to thank him. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving her kneeling on the cold marble, staring at the small black jar. She picked it up. It was warm from his pocket. He was a monster, she reminded herself. But as she unscrewed the lid and rubbed the soothing, unscented salve into her cracked skin, the pain vanished almost instantly. And for the first time in her life, Sadie felt utterly terrifyingly seen. The illusion of safety shattered exactly 48 hours later. It happened at 2 a.m. Sadie was in the West Wing, polishing the banisters on the third-floor staircase. The house was dead quiet. Then the floor vibrated. It wasn't a sound at first. It was a heavy, concussive thud that rattled the brass fixtures under her hands. 2 seconds later, the deafening roar of an explosion tore through the night, followed immediately by the sharp, terrifying crackle of automatic gunfire. The front gates. Alarms shrieked to life, a high-pitched wail that drilled into Sadie's skull. The emergency lights kicked on, bathing the opulent hallway in a harsh, strobe-like red glare. Men were shouting downstairs. The heavy thud of boots pounded across the marble foyer. Breach south perimeter. Someone screamed over the din. Sadie dropped her rag. Pure animal panic seized her. The Russians. They hadn't come to negotiate. They had come to burn the house down. She turned to run toward the staff stairwell at the end of the hall. Before she took 3 steps, the massive bay window at the end of the corridor exploded inward. A hail of bullets ripped through the glass, shredding the heavy silk curtains and biting into the plaster walls. Sadie threw herself flat on the floor, covering her head with her arms, as shards of glass rained down on her back like jagged hail. The noise was absolute chaos. Wood splintered, vases shattered. The gunfire was coming from the lawn, aimed directly at the upper floors. She was going to die. Here on a hallway rug she had vacuumed yesterday. Sam was safe, but he was going to grow up an orphan. Suddenly a heavy hand grabbed the back of her uniform collar. Sadie screamed, thrashing wildly, but the grip was iron. She was dragged backward, her rubber shoes skidding across the carpet, hauled violently behind the thick concrete pillar separating the staircase from the hall. She was slammed against a hard chest. "Quiet," a voice hissed in her ear. She knew that voice. It was gravel and smoke and cold authority. Victor. He was breathing hard, pressing her flush against the wall, shielding her body with his own. He held a sleek black assault rifle in one hand, his eyes scanning the shattered window down the hall. In the pulsing red emergency light, he looked like a demon dragged straight from hell. "Mr. Costello." She choked terror, making her teeth chatter. "Shut up," he snapped, not looking at her. He keyed a radio strapped to his chest. "Report." 3 vehicles rammed the gates. A breathless voice crackled through the earpiece. "They're on the lawn. They have heavy ordnance, boss. We're pinning them down, but they're trying to breach the front doors. Hold the line. I'm moving to the panic room," Victor growled. He looked down at Sadie. His dark eyes were wild, dilated with adrenaline, but his hands were perfectly steady. "Can you run?" he demanded. Sadie nodded frantically, unable to find her voice. "Good. Keep your head down. If I stop, you stop. If I shoot you, drop to the floor. Do not leave my side." Before she could process the command, he grabbed her wrist. His grip was bruising. He yanked her out from behind the pillar and sprinted down the opposite side of the corridor, away from the shattered window. Sadie ran, her lungs burning. The house was a war zone. Below them, the sounds of shouting and gunfire echoed up the grand staircase. The smell of sulfur and smoke was thick in the air, choking her. They reached the end of the hall, slipping into Victor's private study. He slammed the heavy oak door shut and locked it, throwing the deadbolt. He moved to the bookshelf behind his desk, reaching blindly behind a leather-bound volume. A heavy click sounded. The entire bookshelf swung open, revealing a steel door. A keypad glowed green in the dark. Victor rapidly punched in a code. The steel door hissed, popping open. "Inside," he ordered, shoving her into the pitch-black space. Sadie stumbled, hitting a soft leather couch in the dark. The lights flickered on harsh white LEDs, illuminating a massive concrete-lined room stocked with water monitors and an armory wall. Victor stepped in behind her and slammed the steel door shut. The heavy locking mechanism engaged with a definitive, echoing thud. The silence that followed was absolute. The gunfire, the alarms, the screaming, it all vanished, cut off by 2 feet of reinforced steel. Sadie collapsed onto the leather couch, burying her face in her hands, her whole body shaking violently. She was hyperventilating, struggling to pull air into her lungs. Victor walked over to the bank of monitors on the wall, flicking switches. The screens flared to life, showing black and white security feeds of his men returning fire on the front lawn. He watched them for a long moment, his face an emotionless mask. Then he turned to face her. He took a step forward, and that was when Sadie saw it. The left sleeve of his white dress shirt was soaked in blood. It wasn't a smear. It was a heavy, saturated stain spreading rapidly from his bicep down to his cuff, dripping onto the concrete floor of the panic room. "You're shot," she whispered, the panic in her chest suddenly freezing into a cold, sharp focus. Victor glanced down at his arm as if he had just noticed a minor stain. "Grazed. Doesn't matter." He walked over to a metal cabinet, opening it with one hand. He pulled out a white first aid box, dropping it onto the coffee table in front of her. He sank heavily into the armchair opposite the couch, dropping the rifle onto the floor. He looked at her, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The boss. The monster. The man who had bought her brother's life. He ripped the bloody sleeve of his shirt, open, exposing the jagged bleeding gouge in his muscle. "I need you to stitch it," he said softly. Sadie stared at the wound, the smell of copper hitting the back of her throat. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She was sitting in the dark with a bleeding king, and the invisible line between them had just completely shattered. The first aid kit was industrial. No cartoon band-aids or travel-sized tubes of neosporin. It held heavy trauma dressings, surgical clamps, and a curved suture needle sealed in sterile plastic. Sadie stared at it. Her stomach rolled. She had cleaned up blood before hours ago in the dining room, but wiping it off marble was different than stopping it from pouring out of a living human being. "I can't do this," she whispered, her voice fracturing. "You can," Victor said. He leaned his head back against the leather chair, his face pale under the harsh LED lights. "I don't have a choice, Sadie. If I pass out from blood loss before my men secure the perimeter, whoever walks through that door first is going to put a bullet in my head. And then they'll put one in yours." That stopped her shaking. The sheer pragmatic brutality of the statement hit her like a bucket of ice water. Survival. That was the only currency that mattered in this room. She opened the kit. Her hands felt clumsy, her fingers stiff. She ripped open an alcohol swab, the sharp, antiseptic smell cutting through the metallic odor of blood. "Wipe the edges," Victor instructed, his eyes closed. "Don't be gentle. Get the fabric out." Sadie moved to his side. Kneeling on the concrete floor, she took his arm. His skin was burning up, a stark contrast to his freezing demeanor. She pressed the swab to the torn flesh. Victor hissed, his jaw-locking muscles corded in his neck. He didn't pull away. "Thread the needle?" he grunted, forcing his eyes open to watch her. She fumbled with the tiny packet, pulling out the curved needle and the thick black nylon thread. She had mended Sam's torn jeans 100 times, sitting under the dim light of their tiny apartment. This was just fabric, meat and skin instead of denim. She repeated it like a mantra in her head. Just fabric. She pinched the edges of the wound together. The flesh was slippery. "Push it through," Victor commanded, his voice tight. "In one side, out the other. Pull it tight. Tie it off. Do it again." Sadie pushed the needle. It met resistance, then popped through the skin. A fresh rivulet of red spilled over her knuckles. She swallowed the bile rising in her throat, pulled the thread and tied the knot. Her breath was coming in shallow, ragged gasps. "Why did you do it?" she asked, her voice trembling. She needed to talk. If she didn't talk, she was going to scream. She tied a second knot. "Do what?" "Sam, the hospital." She pushed the needle through again. Victor flinched his hand, gripping the armrest so hard the leather creaked. "You spent a fortune on a maid's brother. You don't know me. You don't care about me. So why?" Victor was quiet for a long time. The only sound in the bunker was the faint, muffled thud of gunfire bleeding through the concrete ceiling and the wet tearing sound of the sutures. "I spend my life tearing things down," Victor finally said. His voice was a low rasp, stripped of its usual commanding edge. "I ruin businesses, I break legs. I put people in the ground. It's a ledger, Sadie. A big, black ledger full of red ink. I thought buying the kid would balance it. Just a little. Did it? She asked, snipping the thread and moving down the wound. Victor looked at her. Really looked at her. His dark, bloodshot eyes traced the harsh lines of exhaustion on her face, the bruised purple shadows under her eyes, the sheer terror she was fighting to suppress. No, he said softly. It didn't do a damn thing for the ledger. It was a waste of money. Sadie's hand stalled. A cold ache bloomed in her chest. Of course, it was just a transaction that hadn't yielded the emotional return on investment he wanted. But Victor continued his gaze, dropping to her blood-stained hands. It stopped you from crying outside my door, and I found I preferred the quiet. It was the closest thing to vulnerability she had ever heard from a man who wore armor made of violence. He wasn't a savior. He was just a man who was tired of the noise. And somehow that made him infinitely more human than if he had claimed he did it out of the goodness of his heart. She finished the last stitch, tying it off tight. She wrapped a thick gauze bandage around his bicep, pulling the medical tape taut. She sat back on her heels, wiping her bloody hands on her ruined uniform pants. It's done. Victor looked at his arm. It was a butcher's job, ugly and uneven, but the bleeding had stopped. He reached out with his good arm. Sadie flinched, expecting him to grab her, but he just brushed a stray, sweat-soaked lock of hair out of her eyes. His thumb grazed her cheek, leaving a smear of his own blood on her pale skin. You've got good hands, Sadie. Before she could process the weight of that touch, the radio on his chest crackled to life in a burst of static. Boss, it's over. We repelled them. 2 casualties on our side, 5 on theirs. The rest ran. The war was over. The bubble was about to burst. Victor's hand dropped from her face. The exhaustion vanished, replaced instantly by the cold, calculating mob boss. He keyed the mic. Sweep the grounds. I want the bodies off my lawn before the cops start getting curious. I'm coming out. He stood up, swaying slightly but finding his balance. He didn't look back at her as he walked to the heavy steel door and punched in the code. The hiss of the seal breaking sounded like a death knell. The ghost was dead. Sadie knew that now. She had sewn the king back together. You don't go back to scrubbing floors after you've seen the devil bleed. The estate looked like a war zone. Stepping out of the bunker, Sadie choked on the thick, acrid smell of gunpowder and pulverized drywall. The grand hallway, once a testament to obscene wealth, was shredded. The silk wallpaper hung in ribbons. The Persian rugs were covered in plaster dust and shattered glass. Bullet holes chewed through the antique oil paintings lining the walls. Men in tactical gear were dragging something heavy, wrapped in a tarp out the side entrance. Sadie rigidly kept her eyes fixed on the floor. Victor moved through the wreckage with cold efficiency. He barked orders, his injured arm held stiffly at his side. He was back in his element, orchestrating the cleanup of a slaughter as casually as directing traffic. Sadie stood awkwardly by the shattered bay window, her uniform crusted with dried blood. She didn't know what to do. The cleaning cart was a twisted pile of metal down the hall, crushed by a fallen marble bust. Sadie. Victor's voice cut through the shouting. He was standing in the doorway of his ruined office. The heavy oak door was riddled with bullet holes. She walked toward him, her legs feeling like lead. He stepped aside, letting her into the office, and closed the splintered door. The room was relatively intact, though the heavy curtains were torn. Sunlight, pale and grey, was beginning to bleed through the windows, casting long, harsh shadows across the floor. Victor walked to his desk. He opened a lower drawer and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He tossed it onto the polished mahogany. There's a passport in there, a birth certificate, a new social security number. It's good work it'll hold up to federal scrutiny. Victor said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. There's also a bank card. The account has $250,000 in it. Clean money. Sadie stared at the envelope, her brain short-circuited. What is this? It's your ticket out, Victor said, leaning against the edge of the desk. He crossed his arms, wincing slightly as the stitches pulled. The Russians aren't stupid. They had spotters in the trees. They saw you run into the West Wing with me. They know you were in the bunker. By noon today, they'll know your name. They'll know where you live, and they'll know about your brother. Panic clawed its way up Sadie's throat. Sam, I have men at the hospital right now. He's safe, Victor said smoothly. But he won't stay safe. Not if you stay here. In my world, leverage is everything. You are leverage now. I'm just a maid, Sadie protested, her voice rising in desperation. You were a maid, Victor corrected sharply. Now you're the woman who was in my panic room. You're a target. He pointed to the envelope. Take the kid. There's a flight booked for Seattle out of a private airfield in 2 hours. A car will take you. You disappear. You start over. The money will pay for the rest of his treatments in Washington. Sadie reached out her trembling fingers, brushing the rough paper of the envelope. $250,000. A new life. Safety. It was everything she had been praying for since Sam got sick. It was a miracle wrapped in manila. She looked up at Victor. He was watching her, his face a perfect, unreadable mask. He was discarding her. Efficiently. Cleanly. Like a burned burner phone. And if I don't take it? She whispered. The words slipped out before her conscious mind could stop them. Victor's jaw tightened. Don't be stupid, Sadie. Take the out. You said it yourself. She countered, her voice, gaining a sudden, terrifying strength. They know who I am. If I run, I spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering if the man drinking coffee next to me in Seattle is a Russian hitman, wondering if Sam's nurse is on someone's payroll. You'll be a ghost. You're good at that. I don't want to be a ghost anymore, she snapped. The silence in the office was deafening. Sadie breathed heavily, her chest heaving, staring down the most dangerous man in the city. Victor pushed off the desk. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides, his towering frame suddenly suffocating. He backed her up against the heavy wooden door, his hand slamming flat against the wood on either side of her head. Do you have any idea what you're saying? He growled, his face inches from hers, the smell of his cologne mixed with blood and cordite wrapped around her. If you stay, you don't go back to scrubbing floors. You belong to me. Publicly, under my protection. You step into the crosshairs and you never ever get to step out. Sadie looked up into his dark, furious eyes. She saw the violence there, the possessiveness, the absolute unyielding control. But she also saw the man who had let her stitch his torn flesh, the man who had bought a dying kid a TV with monster trucks just to make a crying girl stop crying. I'm not running, she said. Her voice didn't shake. Victor stared at her. For a long, agonizing moment, he didn't move. Then he reached down, his large hand wrapping around the back of her neck. His grip was firm, territorial. Go to the hospital, he ordered, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. Pack his things. My men will move him to the private medical wing here at the estate. And then you come back to me. He stepped away, turning his back on her, dismissing her with the wave of a hand. Sadie didn't look at the envelope on the desk. She turned the brass handle and walked out of the ruined office. St. Jude's felt different this time. It felt entirely foreign. Sadie walked down the 5th floor corridor, flanked by 2 massive men in tailored suits. They didn't speak to her. They just moved like silent, lethal shadows, their eyes scanning every doctor, every nurse, every open doorway. She wasn't Sadie, the desperate sister, anymore. She was the boss's property. She walked into room 505. Sam was sitting up eating a cup of red Jell-O. He looked better. The new meds were already working, bringing a faint flush of color to his hollow cheeks. "Sadie," he grinned, dropping his plastic spoon. Then he noticed the two mountains of muscle standing by the door. "Who are they?" "They're friends of my boss," Sadie said, forcing a calm smile. She walked over to the closet and pulled out his duffel bag. "We're moving, Sammy." "Again, where?" "To a house. A really big house. They have a doctor there just for you." She threw his clothes into the bag, zipping it shut with finality. It took 30 minutes. The hospital staff didn't ask questions. They took one look at the men in suits, checked the discharge papers signed by Dr. Evans, and got out of the way. Money and fear moved the world, and Victor Costello had an endless supply of both. The ride back to the estate was silent. The black SUV had tinted windows thicker than a bank vault. Sadie watched the city roll by the familiar gritty streets of her old life, fading into the distance. She was crossing a threshold. There was no going back to the cheap apartment, the late-night bus rides, the crushing weight of debt. The heavy iron gates of the Costello estate came into view. They were mangled, twisted off their hinges from the ramming vehicles, currently surrounded by a team of welders, throwing showers of sparks into the afternoon air. The SUV bypassed the service entrance. It pulled directly up to the grand stone steps of the main foyer. The door was opened for her. Sadie stepped out. She didn't have her grey uniform on. She was wearing her own clothes, faded jeans, a plain black sweater. It felt like armor. She left Sam in the medical wing with the estate's private physician and walked up the grand staircase. The house was already transforming. The blood was gone. The glass was swept up. Carpenters were boarding up the shattered windows. The machine of the Costello Empire never stopped running. She walked down the second-floor corridor. The brass sconces she had been polishing 2 nights ago were dented by bullet strikes. Victor's office door was open. She walked in. He was sitting behind his desk, a fresh white shirt on the left sleeve, rolled up to accommodate the thick bandage. He was reading a ledger, a glass of scotch, sweating on the wood beside him. He didn't look up when she entered. He knew it was her. Sadie walked up to the desk. The manila envelope was still sitting there, exactly where he had left it. She picked it up. Victor finally raised his eyes. They were guarded cold, waiting for her to take the out, waiting for her to realize she wasn't built for this world. Sadie held his gaze. She didn't say a word. She moved her hands, gripped the thick paper, and tore the envelope in half. The sound of tearing paper was loud in the quiet office. She tore it again, and again, dropping the shredded pieces of the fake passport and the clean money onto the polished mahogany desk. "I told you," Sadie said, her voice steady and grounded. "I'm not running." Victor looked at the shredded paper. He looked up at her. The coldness in his eyes cracked, replaced by a dark, consuming fire.